did not see themselves as apostles. They saw themselves as heirs to the apostles, right? And there's a big difference between the two, isn't it? And might I say that there was a definite scriptural precedent for this. First of all, the New Testament presents the work of the apostles and prophets in what we might call a foundational sense. Do you remember that passage from Ephesians 2:20? He talks about the foundation of the apostles and prophets. And the foundation needs to be laid once, right? We do not need continuing authoritative revelation from the apostles and prophets because we have it as it's recorded in the New Testament, and that's our foundation. But secondly, James, one of the original 12, do you remember James, right? In the book of Acts, it's in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. James, one of the original 12 apostles, right? You might even say one of the favorite apostles, Peter, James, and John. James was martyred in Acts chapter 12. Now, when Judas committed suicide, what was the reaction of the 11 remaining disciples? They said, we got to replace him, right? And so they made a 12th apostle, Matthias, right? Now, when James was martyred, there was no attempt to replace him. You see the difference? They felt Judas has to be replaced because of the shame and the disgrace in which he ended his office. But James does not have to be replaced. When they did not choose another apostle to replace James, it was their way of saying, our work of apostles is foundational and it won't be repeated. By the way, another way to stress this idea from Scripture is to go to the book of Revelation where it talks about the foundation of the New Jerusalem. And it says on there, on each of the 12 foundations of the New Jerusalem is written the names of one of the 12 apostles of the Lamb. Right? Very much so. The foundation of the apostles, which doesn't need to be continually replaced. By the way, if you want to get into a good debate with somebody about those foundations of the New Jerusalem in the book of Revelation, who's the 12th apostle in the book of Revelation? And you get a very warm debate whether it was Matthias, the guy that replaced him in the book of Acts, but the sentimental favorite, of course, is Paul, right? Instead of Matthias, and so you can argue about that to your heart's content. But anyway, what we find here is a scriptural precedent for this idea that the apostles were one thing, and now in the early church, they were the heirs of the apostles. So in the New Testament, in the early church time, the emphasis was not on apostles. The emphasis is on what we might call the office of bishop. Now, bishop, of course, is a New Testament office. It comes from the ancient Greek word episkopos, which just basically means overseer, and it describes an office of some kind in the church. But the office of bishop began to be emphasized more and more in this period of the early church. Generally, the bishop was the leader of the Christians in a particular city and its immediate region. He had oversight over the many congregations of Christians in that area. Okay, so you just take a town, right? Take the town of Spital, right? And you would have the bishop of Spital. Now there would be several Christian congregations, not of different denominations, but just there was no one big meeting place. They would all meet in the home fellowships all over the area, right? So in Spital itself, you might have a dozen Christian congregations in different home churches, right? And then you would have one in Seeboden, and then you would have one in Millstatt, and you would have one in different geographical regions, and there would be one bishop, so to speak, the bishop of Spital, who would have sort of the authority and the governance over all these different areas. Okay, that's sort of how it grew in its area. This increase of authority in the bishop developed quite naturally. Right? I mean, think about the difference at the very beginning of Spital, right, when there would be one small Christian congregation there, and then after 2 generations, when there's maybe 20 congregations meeting in homes all over the Spital area, right? Think of the difference, right, between 1 and 20. Well, as the church grows, there's more people and there's more resources, right? Secondly, as the church grows, there's more needs to meet. Thirdly, The problem of persecution makes leadership all the more important. And then fourth, the problem of heresy makes leadership all the more important. So because of all these reasons, you might say that the bishops became more and more powerful, right? If the bishop of Spital is overseeing 20 congregations, he has more power, so to speak, than if he's overseeing one congregation. He has more money, has more resources, persecution, heresy, all these things sort of very naturally serve to increase the authority that the bishop has. Now, this trend was recognized and encouraged by the apostolic fathers, including Ignatius of Antioch. Ignatius of Antioch, who did his ministry between 110 and 117 approximately, his whole emphasis was to strengthen the office of bishop in the early church. These are some of the things he said. He said, pay attention to the bishop and to the board of elders and the deacons. And then he said, do nothing without the bishop. And then he said, you must follow the bishop as Jesus Christ followed the Father. And then he said, let no one do any of the things that have to do with the church without the bishop. Now, so you can see how on a very spontaneous way, very natural way, the office of bishop would become more important and more powerful. But then, think of the map of Christian congregations spread all over the ancient world. When you think about that, this whole idea of all these congregations, well, let's face it, some of these cities where there are Christians are more important than others, right? I mean, look, I don't want to say Spital is unimportant, but if you compare Spital to Vienna, which one is more important, right? Which is more prestigious, to be the bishop of Vienna or the bishop of Spital, right? It's very obvious, isn't it? So 4 cities rose to prominence in this period of the early church, and they're known as the patriarchal cities. The 4 cities were Jerusalem, Antioch, Rome, and Alexandria. The bishops of these cities sort of rose to a special prominence and a special stature. Now listen, you got to pay attention to what I'm saying here. Not that I don't think you're paying attention, but I'm just calling attention to this. Listen, you know why this is important? You don't understand it yet. I'm explaining to you how there became a pope. Okay? This is all in the development of the papal office. You know, all back to the illustration I gave of the bishop of Spital. All of those same trends and ideas will result in the formation of the papal office. Okay? What I want you to notice is how natural it all was. I'm not saying it was good. I'm just saying it was natural. Nobody sat down with a piece of paper and made a diagram that said, we're going to go from this in the days of the apostles to this in the popes. Nobody sat down and did that. But it happened in a very natural way. Not, I'm saying necessarily good. Some very natural things need to be resisted, don't they? But it happened in a very natural progression. So first, the importance of the bishop in all these different cities rose in prominence. Second, a few particular cities among them all became even more prominent. Notably, Jerusalem. Why would Jerusalem be a prominent patriarchal city? Why? Well, because of the birth of Jesus and the ministry of Jesus and the birth of the church, right? Well, wouldn't you rather be the bishop of Jerusalem than the bishop of, Murrieta or Spital or something like that, right? I mean, it sounds cool, right? I'm the bishop of, so Jerusalem. Why would Antioch be a powerhouse center? Antioch, if you notice in the book of Acts, the center of Christian dynamic ministry moves from Jerusalem to Antioch. Antioch was the church of the Apostle Paul. This was Paul's home church. He visited Jerusalem, but this was Paul's home church. Okay, so Antioch was important. Why would Rome be important? Rome was important because Rome was Rome. Rome was the leading city of the world. Rome was New York, London, and Paris all rolled into one. Rome was Rome. To be the bishop